Hello, I'm Rachel from Lush Little Jungle, and thank you to everybody for joining me tonight in a slightly later session time. I usually do these at around 2 o'clock Sydney, which is Eastern Standard Time, Australian Eastern Standard Time. But tonight's guest is joining us from Serbia, which means that we need to be a little bit more flexible with our time. So I know that this is dinner time for a lot of people watching. So please feel free to come and then leave for a little bit, come back later. This will be available on my stories for 24 hours afterwards. So if you can't watch all of it now, you can definitely catch up on it later. Plus, I will be putting it up onto YouTube as well. So if this is your first time watching, I do these kind of Saturday sessions where I chat about all things plant related. So in the past, I've spoken to people such as Scott from Dr. Green Thumbs, where we talked about fertilizer. I had a great chat with Kerry from the Mellow Pot, where we talked about humidifiers and grow lights. I had a chat about choosing the right plants for your space. What else was there? I chatted with Tammy last week and we spoke about pest management. That was a great one. And I've also had the guys from the Plant Runner talk about the beautiful products that they make. But today's guest, and I'm very, very excited about it because I've been chatting to him for, I don't know, maybe at least a year now. Like I said earlier, joining us currently from Serbia, although he does live in the US, is Mr Houseplant, or Vlad as he's commonly known. So he is an absolutely fabulous educator. He has a great Instagram that you should check out if you need a good source of inspiration and education. He's really good at explaining things to people. And today he's going to come on and he's going to chat to us about propagation. Now, if you're unfamiliar with him, his background, he's been nurturing and caring for plants for about 10 years now. In the past, he ran a carnivorous plant nursery in Serbia for 2 years, which sounds really cool. And then more recently over in the US where he lives, he worked in a plant shop called The Little Leaf, which is great. So I'm going to bring him on now by pressing the magic button. Hey, Kylie. I'm trying to press the magic button. I am pressing the magic button. And Vlad is about to join us now, which is very exciting. In the meantime, you can look at my face. Oh, hi.
Hi, Rachel. How are you doing?
Oh my gosh. So while I was chatting to you on WhatsApp, getting this all set up, I was trying every single different internet connection I have, including my cell internet. And then eventually I've grabbed my boyfriend's phone. So I'm just going to chat to my boyfriend quickly. If you want to use my phone for the next hour, please feel free to use my phone. So that we can get this up and running. Hello and hi and welcome to everybody. So today's session is all about propagation. Like I said earlier, come and go as you please. This video will be available for 24 hours afterwards. It'll also be available on YouTube. Neither Vlad or myself will be offended if you leave. We can't see if you come and go. So, you know, come and learn a bit, come and learn a lot. We don't mind. We're just happy to have you all here pretty much. So hi Vlad, how are you going today?
Good, good. Thank you very much for organizing this. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. It's been great to be able to get someone on board. Everyone else that I've had so far has been in Australia. And then when I realized that you were in Serbia, I was like, yes, this is great, because the time difference between like Australia and the UK is terrible. And with America, it can be quite tough as well. But I think it's a 6 or 7 hour time difference, which means that it's 11 a.m. for you now. Is that right?
Yeah, it's 11 a.m. for me. And actually, I think it's really good that I'm in Serbia, because if I was in the US, I think we would have a 14-hour difference.
Yes,
and
it's just that bit hard to work with.
My girlfriend was in Australia last year, so I remember how difficult it was with her.
Yeah, the hardest time difference I've got to say is Australia to the UK, because it's like a 12-hour difference, so like 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. They're just like, to get any kind of overlap means that someone has to stay awake late at night or get up really early. And it looks like, by the sounds of things, I'm reading the comments, someone said hi from Uruguay. We've got a bunch of different people. So it's great having this on at a time slot where loads of people can join. So I'm going to start off with 2 a.m. here. Wow, you're keen. keen, or someone who has problems sleeping and likes to learn about plants while they sleep, maybe. Anyway, I'm going to get started off with the questions. I'm gonna ask you this question and get you to explain it to me like I'm brand new, like I'm a child, like I've never heard of this before. But can you explain to me in really simple terms what exactly is propagation?
Okay, well, propagation is a fun and easy way to multiply your houseplants. So
Yes.
by taking a piece of an existing plant, you produce another plant or even multiple new plants.
Mm-hmm.
So in a nutshell, it's just an easy and fun way to increase the size of your indoor jungle.
Yep, agree. So what are the most common forms of propagation that exist?
So there are many forms of propagation. I would say the most common ones are division, stem cuttings or tip cuttings, and leaf propagation. Division is the easiest and I would say the fastest method, because you are propagating a plant that has already propagated itself. You are taking a plant that is already multiplied and you're dividing it at the root level. And the great example of that are snake plants. You all know they grow in clusters, so you just take them out, pull them apart, and that's it.
Very true. So that's like plants like calatheas or like snake plants and a bunch of other plants that all grow in clumps. Peace lilies as well.
Seedy plants as well. Yeah, aloes. Oxalis triangularis.
Yes.
Or yeah, that's just off the top of my head. Then we have the tip cuttings or stem cuttings, which are the most popular, the most commonly used propagation method, where you take a piece of a stem or a branch and propagate it. So this is what we do for most houseplants, like pothos, philodendron, rubber trees, fiddle-leaf figs, and others. Then there is the leaf propagation, which, as the name suggests, is propagation by taking a leaf or a leaf with a petiole. It's common for succulents like Echeveria. I would say people most commonly know leaf propagation from those succulent-like plants, but it's also used for many others like African violets, what else, begonias.
Yes. Peperomias is probably my favorite. I love it with peperomias because they grow little baby leaves while they're propagating, which is so adorable.
Yeah, they're really cute. They're really cute. I've actually propagated a lot of peperomias through leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Those would be the main methods. There are also a bunch of others, like the leaf bud method, layering, air layering, cane cutting, and a very interesting one that I'm sure a lot of people haven't even heard of, which is micropropagation or tissue culture.
Tissue culture. Well, Thai constellation, I don't know what it's like for you in the US or in Serbia, but Thai constellations have become very, very popular here, the monsteras, because someone has mass produced them via tissue culture. And so as a result, there's like a lot of people who become aware of what tissue culture is just because of that plant. And I think also pink princesses have been mass produced here via tissue culture. So it is a word that some people are learning, obviously not trying at home though.
Yeah, that is, I mean, that's the fastest way to produce plants. And I mean, it's used commercially a lot because you can get hundreds of plants, literally hundreds of plants from just a tiny piece of a leaf or a stem or a flower. Yeah, it's used a lot commercially. I tried it out a little bit when I had my carnivorous plant business.
Wow.
You can actually do it at home. It's not easy. You also need to plant hormones. You need to sterilize all the samples, but it's very interesting.
Oh, wow, how cool. You really are the king of propagation. That's so cool. So so what are some of your favorite plants to recommend? So for beginners who are wanting to try propagation for the first time, what are the kind of like go-to plants that you would say that they should try out with?
I would go with pothos or philodendron. I find vining plants to be easy to propagate.
Yes. I'll
Spider
show
plant.
everybody a little example. So this is an example of pothos, otherwise known as devil's ivy, which I'm growing in literally a cup. And you can see here the little roots on it. It is, in my opinion, one of the quickest to grow roots. And they look really cute. So that's an example of one that you can do at home and literally put on a windowsill and it takes up no room.
Yeah, and that one you can actually grow in water for a really long time and it will be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spider plants are also, for me, very fast to propagate.
Yes. I actually haven't tried spider plants yet. I think I can't bear to cut off the babies yet.
Yeah, do it. It's
so
fun.
Cute.
Actually, they are. I've done a time lapse of a spider plant roots growing in water. So that's
yeah, I've seen that one. That one was so cool. Was that the one where you were like you had in a clear vessel and then you found that the roots all started growing in towards the dirt and not exposed to the light, which was to be expected but a bit disappointing.
Yeah, I've had actually multiple videos. Like there's one where I just put a spider plant in water and recorded the roots growing in water, and then I have another one where I transferred the spider plant cutting from those propagated in water. I transferred into soil and then recorded the roots growing in soil.
That might be the one that I've seen. Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah. You do so many of those videos. They're so amazing. I love watching them. I don't have like the space to set it up or the patience, if I'm honest.
Yeah, the space is challenging. Like there's a big part of my apartment that's dedicated to doing time lapses.
Yeah, I bet. And you've got to find the places that have decent light so you can see it enough, like, and you have surface space.
I actually use artificial lights, so I have those semi-professional lights with huge umbrellas to diffuse the light.
Yes.
So it takes even more space then.
Yeah, I bet you it does.
Yeah. Yeah, you can also, so I'm thinking also of other plants that are easy. Prayer plants. Yeah. Jades are super easy, where you just pull off a leaf, you pluck it in soil, and that's it. Yeah.
I think that's why everyone and their dog go into jade plant. It's just like the plant that everyone seems to have growing out on their balcony, whether they want one or not.
Yeah, and when the leaves fall off on their own, which happens often, or we knock them off because they're so easy to get knocked off, they just start growing on their own.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm back in.
There is
now. I'm getting notifications that are very distracting.
Yeah, there's another thing that I would recommend for beginners, which is, it's not a propagation method that we're going to be talking about a lot, probably because not a lot of people propagate through seeds, unless they're into that. But avocado seeds are super easy and super fun.
Yeah, that's something that I've been wanting to try more of, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good beginner's thing to try, because you get a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
And then you can move on to more difficult things.
Yeah, I'll show you my one. So I couldn't grow one from scratch myself, and I don't show photos of this on my Instagram, because as soon as I do, I get like 50 messages from people asking me how to propagate avocado, and because I don't know how, I'm a bit overwhelmed. So it's like this little secret that I have. But someone gave me an avocado seed that had already started, and so you can see here the roots are like really established. And I had this growing in here for a year, and I'm not putting it in soil just because I'm feeling stubborn and I want to see how long it will grow in water. Because I think it looks so cool growing in this little pot like this. But I can't show photos of it because otherwise I'll have a billion people asking how to do it, and I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I get a lot of avocado questions. That's why I just posted a few videos so I can just point people to the videos.
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people want to use. I've been hearing from people that like one of the best and easiest ways to do it is if you have a worm farm or compost, is to just chuck them in there and then see what happens to turn up. I don't have either worm farm or compost. If I did, it sounds like an easier way to do it, perhaps. I like the set and forget kind of method.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Me too. That's why I use the wet paper towel method.
Yes.
You just wrap it, put it in a drawer, forget about it, and then a month or 2 months later, it's good to go.
And
Like
see what happens.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the tricks with propagation is to put it somewhere where you won't entirely forget about it, but somewhere where it's not in your view all the time, because especially if you're new to it, like it's like watching a kettle that never boils, watching a plant never propagates if you're staring at it all the time. So
Right. Yeah.
so that helps. That definitely helps. So speaking of frustrating plants, what plants do you find take the longest to propagate?
Oh, that's easy. Snake plants and ZZ plants. I don't think anything as slow as snakes and ZZs.
Yeah, snakes and ZZs. The fiddle leaves I find are quite lengthy as well.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll show you a snake plant example I have. So you'll note the date here. That says the 25th of February. That's the 25th of February last year, not this year. And this is this is how much has grown. They're probably ready for me to separate and plant. And then there's this one here.
Okay. Actually, let me show you mine. They're here. I should.
This little baby. So yeah, snake plants are notorious for taking a really long time. So for anybody who's thinking about propagating snake plants, it's fine, but just know that you're looking at 6 to 12 months. So you really need to forget about it.
Here are mine.
Wow.
I mean, usually it takes me about 2 months just to get the roots growing.
Yep.
But since I love experimenting, I love trying to optimize the conditions to get them to propagate as fast as they can. Mm-hmm. So I'm using heat mats lately. Yes. And I actually got this one to grow roots in 3 weeks.
Wow, in 3 weeks. That's a huge difference. Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah, huge difference. So I'm just going to get a bunch of heat mats.
Yeah, fair enough. It's worth testing out more. That's great. So of all plants, if you had to choose your favorite, I know it's hard to choose favorites, but if you had to choose your favorite to propagate, which one would you choose? I've already said peperomias is my favorite, and that's, I don't think I have any examples here. I have examples somewhere else, but peperomias grow like baby versions of their leaves underwater, and it's so adorable. They don't last very well in water. Like after about 3 months, you need to transfer them to soil because they do die. They're not like some other plants that if you propagate them in water, they can kind of live in water indefinitely. But they're so cute that's by far my favorite. But I also propagate a lot of devil's ivy because I like greenery all around my home. And the thing I love about propagation is that you can put them in tiny little vases and they fit everywhere. So even if you're in a small apartment with like little pockets, you can add greenery into those little pockets and it looks a lot greener as a result without having to go out and buy heaps of plants.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. My favorites are snake plants.
Yeah. Even though you're like a bit of a masochist given how long they take.
So that's the thing. I love trying to optimize the conditions and trying to make them grow as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. But I also look amazing. So if you take a whole leaf cutting, so you don't split it in sections, but take a whole large leaf, and you put it in water, and then in a few months when it grows a cluster of new leaves, and then in another year it grows another new cluster of leaves, and then you have those beautiful orange roots. Like I have a couple of those cuttings back in DC. Yeah. They look incredible. It's just incredible. Like green here, orange roots. They just look very nice.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Yeah. You're just very patient. A lot more patient than me.
Yeah, I am. And that is going to be my main advice for people, to have patience if they're going to do propagation,
True. And it is a good way to learn patience as well. Just quickly, so for anybody who's joining, I'm currently interviewing Mr Houseplant, and we are talking about propagation, talking about currently some like general information around propagation, and we'll talk about some other stuff around water propagation and things soon. So which plants do you find are the trickiest? So for me, I find lipstick plants that I've tried to propagate lipstick plants maybe 5 or 6 times. I've tried it in water, I've tried it in soil, I've tried it in sphagnum moss, and I cannot get them to strike. Every time they just like die and go limp. So I've just, even though some people claim that they're apparently really easy, they are not easy for me. So
Yeah.
I've not tried.
Yeah, I guess for me those would be Scheffleras. I have a lot of problems with them. I always have to take multiple cuttings in order to get one to survive. Also, what I find really, really hard is propagating aloes from leaves. So I've been trying to do that for a little bit, and I have another batch of aloe leaves that I'm trying to propagate here. I actually didn't know that it was possible to propagate them from single leaves. I found 2 videos of people who were able to do it, so
yeah,
I'm
right.
hoping, you know.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, you can.
So can you chat me through some tips on like, so let's say this is like more important for beginners. If they have a plant, how can they figure out if the plant they have can be propagated, and how can they figure out what method? So like one of the things that I find in chatting to people, because I get about 30 to 40 DMs a day, is that people will be like, hey Rachel, I've just taken a cutting from my alocasia and I put it in water. Can you tell me why it's not growing any roots? And then I have to like explain, I'm like, I'm really sorry, but alocasias don't grow roots in water. They propagate via growing pups or need to be grown from a bulb. So like, what would you say is some good advice to give to someone to figure out A, if their plant can be propagated, and B, how to do it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I would say first that most houseplants can be propagated. I don't know a lot of houseplants that cannot. So one example are palm trees. Palm trees are generally propagated through seeds, so none of the asexual methods work.
Yeah, I guess that's the same for ferns then as well, because they reproduce through spores. Most of them reproduce through spores.
But with ferns, you can divide them. You can divide them once they, depending on the fern, but you can generally divide them. Whereas palm trees, there is, for example, the parlor palm or Chamadora elegans. That's the one that spreads on its own, so you can use the division method. But most palm trees are propagated by seeds. And I'm sure there might be other plants that you can propagate, but for the most part, like most houseplants, you can propagate.
Yes.
Now, in terms of the method, it's just about looking at the plant and trying to determine what type of a plant it is. So, for example, if you have woody plants like rubber trees or fiddly figs, you can generally propagate them by taking stem cuttings or tip cuttings. And you can also propagate them through air layering. If you have a vining plant, sorry, vining plant, not a whining plant. I always get those messed up. So if you have a vining plant, like a pothos or a philodendron, you know that they can generally be propagated through stem cuttings or layering. Then you have plants that multiply on their own, like snake plants or like ZZ plants. So that we mentioned plants that propagate themselves through tubers or rhizomes or bulbs. And those plants can always be propagated by division. So those are the general guidelines. You know, you look at a plant and you determine what type of plant it is, and then of course over time, the more experience you have, the easier it will be. You'll be able to just take a look at a plant and pretty much guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And if in doubt, you can always Google it. If you know the name of your plant, Google the name of the plant plus the term propagation. I like to suggest people do that before they cut their plant, because the last thing you want to do is cut a leaf off and then realize that you can't do anything with the leaf.
True, true. I like to also suggest when people, I mean, for propagation videos, yes, you can just Google, but when people are looking for some, let's say, more advanced information, I suggest that they add the term agricultural extension to their search. Just so they know they will get university websites or agricultural extension.
That's a good tip. That's a really good tip.
Pretty reliable, yeah.
So one of the things I see people a little bit concerned about, especially when they're looking at doing this the first time, so this is for people who are looking to propagate via stem cutting, is they're worried they're going to hurt the plant. So what would you say to someone who's worried that they're going to hurt a plant by cutting it?
First, I would say that our plants are so sheltered and so protected in our homes compared to the outdoor environment. So the plants outside, they have rain. They
good life, kind of.
They have hurricanes. They are so spoiled in our homes, you know. You have so many insects outside that are eating them. You have animals that are damaging them. You have people stomping on them. So they're very protected in our homes. And just by making one cut, that's really not going to make any difference to the plant. But I think it's also important to know that to know what happens when you take a cutting, because I think that helps people lose the fear. So you know about
when you see a plant regrow, it makes you respect plants' resilience a little bit more and realize that if you do something like it to it, it'll figure out a way to keep growing, because plants want to live. They're very resilient. They're used to having branches snapped off and having to continue on.
Exactly. And most questions that I get are related to, I'm scared the plant will die when I cut it, or I'm scared it's not going to continue growing, or I'm scared it will not be as bushy, where in fact it's going to be bushier after you cut it, because pruning stimulates new growth. And maybe I can actually explain that a little bit. So there is something that's called the terminal bud. So all the tips of branches and stems, they have a terminal bud. The terminal bud actually produces hormones that suppress the growth of other buds, of lateral buds, the other remaining buds on that stem. So once you cut off the terminal bud, once you take a cutting, you are effectively giving permission to those dormant buds to start growing. So pruning actually stimulates growth, and if you had one branch or one stem, after you cut it, most likely you will get 2 branches, if not even more.
Yeah, which is so cool.
It is. It's amazing. And I found that when people hear that actually helps them take the first cut, make the first cut. Once they know.
And then on top of that, the cutting that you've taken, if you propagate that as well, you've got that which you can replant into the top of the plant. So you've got a plant that will naturally become bushier, plus you've got a new piece of plant material to add into it, so you can have another new vine growing as well. So sometimes it's 3 new points of growth that you get as a result just from one little snip.
Yeah, and that's an excellent tip for pothos, for example. People sometimes buy small pothos plants that only have like 1 or 2 stems, but they're just very long, and they want a bushy plant.
Yes.
That's an excellent thing to do.
Chop.
Cut them up. Yeah.
Just quickly, Plant Mitch had a question saying, was that agricultural extension? So you know how when you're talking about when you're Googling the plant's name plus propagation, so you're saying that you should write the word agricultural propagation into your search term so you can find scientific papers. Is that correct?
You add the term agricultural extension.
Oh, you add agricultural extension.
Yes, exactly, because those are the most reliable sources.
Gotcha. And there was a question above from Amber Vanden Winchart. Sorry, I probably said your name really wrong. Saying, how can you propagate a prayer plant? I can answer this really quickly. If it's a calathea or if it's a tenanthe, it'll be via root division. If it's a maranta, which grows on a vine, you can propagate it via stem cuttings and grow it in water. Those are the three main prayer plants. So it depends on which kind of prayer plant that you have, because calatheas, for example, will not propagate from stem cuttings. If you take a cutting of a leaf or a stem and put it in water, unfortunately, the leaf will just slowly die. So for anyone just joining right now, I am currently interviewing Mr. Houseplant on all things propagation related. We've just chatted about general tips, and we're now going to talk a little bit more in depth about water propagation, because that's super popular. I think at the moment everybody's trying water propagation because it's loads of fun. And I thought we could talk about, there's a lot of articles that you can read online, and there's a lot of Facebook groups where they will talk about certain things in a way that might make things seem true when they're not actually scientifically correct. So sometimes you'll find that people repeat certain things, and as a result, it becomes like a believed fact. So I'll give you an example and you can answer this for me. One of the things that I read recently that a lot of people were saying was that the color of the vessel that you put your plant into makes a difference to how roots grow. And someone said that it's better to propagate in a clear vessel because roots need light to grow. So what is your experience with the color of the vessel that you're using? So I'm talking about propagating in water like this. Am I better off propagating in a clear vessel, in like an amber colored vessel? Should I use something that's dark like this, for example? Or is there no difference at all?
So I would say if the roots needed light to grow, they wouldn't be growing in soil.
Yes. When I read that, I was like, yeah, it's pretty dark in soil.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are some pros and cons with using clear and versus colored vessels. So I would say in a clear vessel, the cuttings will be getting more light. And the more light they get, the more they can photosynthesize and the faster they will grow. Mm-hmm. But there is also an issue, and that's that the water is going to get dirty more often, especially if there is direct sun. So you will just have to replace the water more often.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I personally use transparent vessels because I love watching the roots grow.
Yeah, me too. I like seeing it.
Yeah. And you can also spot immediately if there's something wrong with the cuttings, you know, yes. If they're starting to die, if there's anything wrong. Yeah. I mean, you can also use colored vessels, and I've done that many times, but you just have to be aware that the part of the cutting that's inside the dish is going to get less light because it's not transparent, obviously. So that may slow down the growth. But you also won't need to replace the water as often. So, yeah, cool. I'm just a fan of transparency.
Myth busted. So water propagation, I think I get asked a lot of questions about this. I bet you get asked probably a cajillion more than I do. What are your general tips, I guess, for water propagation?
So I have a few general tips a few that will apply to both water and soil propagation, and that's that light and warmth are the two most important factors. Mm-hmm. So the more light you can provide to a plant, to a cutting, it will photosynthesize more, yep. So it will produce roots faster, it will grow faster. And also, you need to give the cuttings a warm environment. First, you know, give them in a cold, dark basement, but in a room that has, you know, normal room temperature that's comfortable for humans as well. And then also the temperature of the propagation medium, whether it's soil or water, if it's warmer, the cuttings are going to grow faster. And the perfect example was this snake plant cutting that I showed you.
Yeah.
That's in a south-facing window, so it's getting really huge amounts of light. Even actually, this one is the best.
And just for any Aussies watching, remember that south and north are different for us. So,
right.
So for us, northeast facing is our optimal direction. In Australia, south facing is your morning sun. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Which one gets morning sun for you?
East.
Okay, but then south is better for overall light levels?
Yes, south gets the most.
So that's like our north, just for the sake of Australia. And the whole southern hemisphere, not just Australia.
Whole southern hemisphere,
New Zealand and all the other wonderful countries that are here.
Right. Yeah. Okay, sorry, where were we?
Sorry, you're talking about your general tips for propagating plants. So you're saying that warmth and light are really important. They're having it in a south-facing room in the northern hemisphere or a north-facing room in the southern hemisphere is good.
Right. And in terms of warmth, so I highly recommend using heat mats because they can increase the temperature of the propagation medium by 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, which makes a huge difference. So if you can, you should aim for the temperature of water or soil to be between 24 and 26 degrees Celsius. And since I'm a nerd, I even bought a thermometer to measure the temperature of...
I definitely think that's a good idea if you're experimenting and you're using things like heat mats anyway. That if you're going to like expose your plants to heat like that you want to be able to check what the heat is. So it's very sensible. Obviously not a surprise with you being a self-confessed nerd. I too am a self-confessed nerd. So if I had a heat mat, I would have a thermometer myself as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just love measuring things. And it's not really necessary for people who are just starting out. I think as long as you just, provide light and warmth, the cuttings will be fine. But if you want to get a little bit more into it, then you can get a hygrometer and a thermometer and all the tools. Let me see other tips. So for water propagation specifically, you have to make sure that the bottom of the cutting and all the nodes that you're trying to propagate are sitting in water. Especially when people use test tubes for propagation. They don't fit a lot of water. Plants are going to use some of their water, and then another part of that water is going to just naturally evaporate. So
and test tubes tend to evaporate more quickly, I find, than some other bigger vessels, obviously.
So that's one thing to know, that you always make sure that the nodes stay in water so that they can grow roots. And here's another tip that I'm not sure if people are aware of. The size of the leaf matters. The bigger the leaf, the faster it will propagate. So if you have a snake plant, now I can take multiple cuttings. I can take like 4 or 5 inch segments and try to propagate each one of them, or I can cut off the whole leaf and propagate it as a whole. I've seen scientific studies where people have actually measured the surface area of the cuttings, and they determined that the larger the surface area is, the faster it will propagate. The higher density of the roots you will get, and the longer they will be.
Fascinating.
Absolutely
fascinating. So one of the most common questions that I see come up is, how come if I water my plants too quickly, I overwater them and I cause root rot? How is it then that I can put a plant into water and it somehow loves it and does better? Obviously, I know the answer to the question, but how would you explain that to people?
I would say the answer is pretty simple. I can answer it in one word, and that is oxygen.
Oh, great.
But I'm going to elaborate a little bit.
That's probably a good idea.
So, I mean, I hope a lot of people know by now that roots absorb oxygen and then release carbon dioxide. So oxygen is extremely important for healthy root growth and for healthy plant growth. when a plant is sitting in waterlogged soil, it's basically the roots are getting suffocated because it's hard for the roots to absorb the oxygen. All the macropores with oxygen are gone, so it's very difficult to perform the gas exchange. Whereas in water, the gas exchange is very easy for the plants. Also, in the soil, you have higher competition for the oxygen because you have a higher number of microorganisms that use the oxygen. And once it's used up, then the development of so-called anaerobic microorganisms starts. So microorganisms that develop in the absence of oxygen, and they are the ones that cause root rot.
Gotcha.
But
so you can't get root rot happening like it does in water, because root rot is certain bacteria that are, microorganisms that are eating away at the roots that don't live in water.
And also, that's why I often talk about soil structure, and that you need to make the soil porous and add amendments like perlite or bark or something else, because it's less likely for a plant to die in soil if it gets enough oxygen. It's more difficult for it to get waterlogged.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Okay, so how often do you recommend changing the water when you're growing in, let's say, a clear vessel and it's in like a warm spot, like you would recommend?
So I would recommend doing it once a week, or more often if it gets dirty more often. Even if it doesn't get dirty, I would still replace once a week, because you want to replenish the oxygen by providing fresh water. There's also another trick which I haven't seen a lot of people doing. You can get an air pump like those that are used for aquariums. You put an air pump, and that way you're providing a constant supply of oxygen.
Clever. Yeah, cool. So, because I've been reading a few people who absolutely swear by it, and I'm going to say this, I don't want to sound too critical. Sometimes people online, when they discover something, they don't necessarily test it. Like a true scientific test would require you doing something in a control variable setting where you have like 15 to 20 of each type for you to be able to do a full experiment, right? No one at home really has time to do that, and I'm not necessarily expecting that people do that. But one of the issues that I have with the information that gets shared online is that you'll have one person that may make a discovery through something that they've done, and then they therefore think that because they've done something a certain way, that they've found the Messiah, and that is the way to do things, and then they tell people, and then those other people tell other people, and that's how you get the production of myths about plants, for example. Like, for example, people who think that misting plants, for example, will raise the humidity, which it doesn't. So one of these myths that I'm reading at the moment is that people say that you should never change the water, because the water will start to develop its own nutrients within the water. And obviously someone's had success with this, right? Plants are resilient. They can live through all kinds of different situations. But I warrant people, I guess, to be wary of the difference between doing something and having a plant survive versus running an experiment where you know through thorough methodology that something is correct. So what would you say about people who are thinking that if you never change the water, it's actually better for the plant than it is to change the water?
Yeah, I think you defined it really well. Like, people do something and then they take their one experience and generalize it and apply it to everyone's plants in all conditions. Like
which can be a bit dangerous. It's great if you found a trick with making spaghetti bolognese. You've realized if you put a little bit of sugar in there that it cuts through the acidity of the tomato, for example. That's how cooking works. You discovered this one addition. It works with cooking, but I'm always wary with that with plants, because you have different plants, you have different homes, you have different humidity, you have different temperatures. There's so many variables in people's homes that anyone who gives you advice saying never and always, personally, I think you should take with just a little teaspoon of salt, because there's no always and never with plants, because there's too many factors that can affect things.
I agree, and that's what I love about houseplants is that you can do things in many different ways.
Yes.
There isn't only one right way to do it. There are ways that are more optimal or less optimal. So
yes. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, you can propagate plants without ever changing the water. I've done it successfully. Other people have done it successfully, but that is definitely the less optimal way that reduces your chances of successful propagation. Replacing the water would be more optimal. Also, over time, the pH of the water changes, not just the amount of oxygen. So there are other reasons why the water should be changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's good. What other questions do I have? I was going to ask what the best spot to put a propagating plant in is, any spots to avoid. I feel like we've kind of covered off that the best places are to have it near a window or near light, so probably within a few meters. But are there any spots that you think that people should avoid putting the plant in if they're propagating it?
Well, the opposite of that, I would say avoid dark corners.
Yes.
So again, there's less optimal and more optimal. You can propagate a plant even in a dark corner.
Yep.
But since the plant is not getting any light, it's going to be using what little energy it has stored.
Yep.
So once you do get a new growth, once you do get new leaves, they tend to be long and leggy. They're not going to be healthy looking. So, and I really see people propagating plants in dark areas very often. I don't know why, but yeah, that's what you should avoid. What I also suggest, you can use grow lights. A lot of people don't think about that. You can propagate anything using just grow lights, even in a basement, even in those dark corners. Like if you really want to use a dark corner, because
that's a good idea.
If the cuttings look good in that dark corner, just get a grow light.
Yep, very true. Yeah. The other thing I would also watch out for, I know this because my friend did it, is don't put it in direct sunlight if you live somewhere hot. If the water is going to reach 35 degrees from the temperature of the sun, it will melt the plant.
That's a good point. Actually, all of my
obviously giving it sun is good, but just be wary that there is a temperature range that is good for the water to be at. And if it's 35 degrees or 40 degrees, if you've got it sitting somewhere outside, that it may not be the best place for you to put it. But the thing is with propagation is try a bunch of things. If you fail, you haven't really failed. You've just learned, like, don't do that again.
Thank you. Every failure is a learning opportunity. So I don't see anything as a failure. It's just a new experience.
Exactly. Now, just one quick little thing. So Instagram has this time limit that it has where you're only allowed to do an IG live for an hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this and then I'm going to restart it and we can start where we left off. So for everybody who's currently here, I would love it if you would all stay along. This will take 30 seconds. All I'm going to do is end this and then start it again. And we'll be back in one moment. So just give me 1 sec. Okay?
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone. Sorry for that short little disconnection. We get cut off. So I beat the cutoff by getting above it and getting in before it starts. So I'm just waiting for everybody to come back and join. Thank you, everybody. I'll send you a little wave. Hello. Thank you for joining again. Lovely to see everyone. We're just getting started. Sorry, bear with me one moment. Just seeing if I'm able to... There we are. Okay. Sorry, I was just... And bringing Vlad back on. Hello. Thank you, everybody. Cool. All right. We are back on and we will continue from where we were. do you find that there's any benefit to the shape of the vessel? So, for example, a test tube versus a wide glass.
That's an interesting question. In terms of whether a cutting will do better in one versus another, I don't think so. But there are other benefits in using one over the other. So, for example, I wouldn't put snake plant cuttings in test tubes. First, I mean, a lot of them can't really fit, but even those that can fit, once they start growing new shoots, they might be out of space, so they might get deformed or damaged.
Yeah.
I also love using wide vessels when I go on vacation, because then I just pick up all of my plants from test tubes and I put them in a huge wide glass dish, and I fill it up so that they can survive for 2 or 3 weeks while I'm away.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
But other than that, yeah, nothing else.
Sorry for anybody who's joining. I'm Rachel from Lush Little Jungle. This is Vlad from Mr Houseplant. We're chatting about propagation. We're about a little over halfway through, so if you've missed any of it and you want to catch up, it's available on my stories right now. You can watch it later. It will also be available on my YouTube channel later. And right now we're talking about water propagation, and we're talking about like different tips and techniques, different questions that people might have around different things. Also to answer the question that the plant Brent just answered, and congratulations on winning the competition recently. Your prize is in the mail. Vlad said that his favorite method, and it's mine too, is propagating in water, and our reason is the same, and it's because we like watching roots grow. So I think that must happen when you get older, maybe, like when you're young and you like go out and you party, and then you get a little bit older and people are like, what are the things you do for fun? You're like, I like to propagate plants and watch roots grow in clear vessels. And people are like, okay.
Yeah. True.
So do you recommend removing any leaves when you put cutting into water, or are they okay to come in contact with water?
So for me, it depends on the type of a plant that I'm propagating. So I generally do tend to have only leaves on the top part of the stem and have the bottom part bare, because you want to have the nodes ideally exposed, and they should be in water. Most leaves will die after a while in water. I mean, peperomes, for example, if they're exposed, if they're sitting in water for a long time, they tend to die.
And that probably helps avoid rot as well. Like if you're someone who's forgetful about changing water, it's probably a good way to avoid rot by just cutting the leaves off and leaving the exposed nodes.
Right. And also for me, depending on the plant that I'm propagating and the size of the leaves, I tend to remove more or less of the leaves. So if I'm propagating a rubber plant, I try to have only 2 leaves, not more than that. First, because the plant is going to need energy to sustain all of those leaves, and also the more leaves it has, there's going to be more transpiration, more water loss. So I find it optimal to have, for plants with big leaves, to have just a few leaves. Yeah. Where it's a plant with a lot of smaller leaves, then it's fine, leaving a lot of them on.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so what kind of water do you recommend using? Like, so I'm talking things like tap water, rainwater, filtered water. I think those are the main kinds of water that people use. I personally use tap water. I use tap water to water all my plants, and I use tap water to propagate all my plants. But what about you?
I also use tap water, and I get that question very often. I think people think that I have some kind of a magic ingredient. If I tell them what it is, then they'll be able to propagate everything.
Yes.
I think for me, the magic ingredients are light and warmth. Those are the magic ingredients. I just use tap water.
If you live in an area that has hard water, or you live in an area that has undrinkable water, you might want to consider using different water sources. I live in a place where you can drink the water from your tap. I recognize there's a lot of people that live in different areas in both developed and undeveloped countries where that's not the case. So if you are somewhere where your water's not that great, if it's, you know, just not as good for plants, if it's hard and or whatnot, that have a look at using things like, you know, rainwater is great. Obviously, rainwater is probably always preferable for plants because it's free of some of the additives that you'll get coming through in tap water. But there's, for most people, if you can drink your tap water, it is fine to use for propagation.
I think it's also important how good your water is in bacteriologically, like how clean it is.
Yes.
Because that is like the amount of pathogens that there are in the water. Hopefully there aren't many because we're supposed to drink that water.
Yes.
But I think that also affects propagation a lot.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, so how do you know when it's time to plant your cutting in water? What's the sign that it's time, that it's ready to become a new plant and to go and start its new journey in soil?
As soon as you get an inch or two of roots, that's the time to pot the cutting. You can do it if they're longer, if a plant spent more time in water, but I generally don't recommend it. I see people propagating their plants for months, and then they take a pothos with like a bunch of roots like this.
Oh,
and
yeah, they can get really big. I
So
think I have some like that.
Yeah, I mean,
But
it
that's
might
because I'm
work.
deliberately growing mine in water. I'm going to leave mine living in water because that's kind of what I want to do with them.
Yeah. I love having them in water. Pothos is so great for water.
Yeah.
I just think, you know, a plant might have a harder time adjusting to soil if it spends too much time in water.
Yes, because the roots that they grow in water are different to the roots that they grow in soil, and you can see the difference from when you uproot a plant that has been growing in soil versus growing in water, because they have evolved their roots differently for different purposes, essentially.
Yeah.
Let's see. So do you have any tips on managing the transplant to soil? So that often, I think, is the hardest part when you're propagating a plant, is when you take it out of water and you put it into soil. You know, you've put 3 or 4 weeks or maybe more time into getting this little cutting to grow roots, and then, you know, it's all of your eyes are on it and you want it to succeed. You put it into soil and then it dies 2 days later, and you're just like, why did I take this out of water? What have I done wrong? What would your tips be in terms of managing that so that it's easiest for the plant?
Yeah, it's very disappointing when that happens. One thing would be what we just talked about, so not letting your plant sit in water for months or years before potting it up. So pot as soon as you introduce roots. But the other problem, I think, is when people propagate tropicals. You pot a cutting that has an inch or two of roots. So those roots will only be able to reach a very limited soil volume. And that is the soil that they can pull the water from.
Yes.
If you have an adult plant, the roots are usually all throughout the pot. So they have a much higher soil volume to absorb moisture from. And when people transplant a cutting from water into soil, if they try to keep the same watering schedule as for the adult plant, the cutting is going to die because the system is not developed enough. So you need to water those cuttings more frequently than the adult plant.
Do you ever use anything like moist sphagnum moss to like wrap around the roots and then put it into soil, or do you just put them straight in?
I put them straight in. I didn't know that wrapping with sphagnum moss was a thing. So yeah, I know that sphagnum moss is used for air layering, for example. That's the common way to air layer. I mean, I think using sphagnum moss for propagation is interesting because sphagnum moss can retain a lot of moisture, but it also has a lot of oxygen, so there's a lot of oxygen in between the moss strands.
Yes.
So I think it could be an interesting medium. But I personally don't have experience with it. But I mean, I'm happy that people are trying out different things. Experimentation is very, very fun, you know.
So Plant Mitch says that on a previous interview that I had with someone called Dr. Greenthumbs, Scott from Dr. Greenthumbs, has suggested that when you propagate a plant and you put it into soil, that you don't water it right away so that the roots can stretch and look for water. He's curious to know what your opinion is on watering them right away or not watering them right away. I will caveat, though, the interview that I had with Dr. Greenthumbs, he wasn't talking about propagating the same kind of plants that we're talking about. So it might be a little bit different. I think Dr. Greenthumb specializes a little bit more in outdoor plants, and we're talking about propagating plants such as mainly vines and begonias and things like that. But what are your thoughts, I guess, on watering straight away or not watering straight away when you propagate?
Yeah, I agree that is a little bit different because outdoor plants have literally an unlimited amount of soil where they can search for water, where indoor plants are usually limited to their small containers.
Yes.
I would definitely recommend watering as soon as you pot the plant. So if we're talking about tropicals, yes, you need to water them because they don't have a lot of water in their stems and leaves.
Yeah.
So they're going to lose the water through transpiration, and if they don't replenish it through the root system, they can wilt pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, because if you're putting them into dry soil after they come out of water, your likelihood is that they will drain whatever water they can find that is in the soil, which will be minimal, and then once they can't find any water, the roots themselves will dry from the ends up to the plant.
Exactly.
And then this one, I've heard that if you cut a V shape in the end of a snake plant, so if you take a cutting from a snake plant leaf, I'm hearing a lot that if you cut a V into the end of a snake plant leaf, that apparently it can help your plant to grow roots more quickly. True or false based on your experience?
That's a very interesting theory. I can't say whether it is better or it isn't. I have tried to find scientific explanation as to why a V cut would be better than a straight cut. I've also asked all of my followers that are using the V cut, and I wasn't able to find any scientific information. Nobody provided any scientific information. All the replies that I got from people were saying that the plant will have a larger surface area to grow roots from.
Yes.
So that is true, but the plants need energy to grow those roots. So that energy comes from light. So I'm not convinced that just by having a larger surface area, the roots are going to grow faster, because the plant still needs to exert the same energy to produce them.
That's very true.
So, yeah, and also there's another issue. If you have a cutting with a V cut, you actually have a cutting that has a smaller surface area than this cutting with a straight cut. And we already know that the bigger surface area you have, the faster the leaf will propagate. So in theory, the V cut should actually propagate even slower. But I have to say, so these are just my thoughts. I haven't actually tested V cut.
Of course.
And I will definitely, that's the first thing I'm going to do when I go back to DC. Yeah, but also, I mean, if someone of the viewers, if they have some scientific information for this, I mean, I would really be interested in hearing about it.
Fair enough. Plant Mitch, I know you've got some questions about propagating succulent leaves. We're actually about to come up to that, so if you hold tight, we will chat about it in just a second. Firstly, those are all the questions that I had about water propagation. I'm now going to move on to soil, so we can talk about succulents at the same time. So propagating in soil has probably been a lot more popular before popular was a thing for propagation. It was just the technique that people use. I think there's a lot of like gardeners who are like 20 or 30 years old going, what the hell are all these young people do propagating in water, because you can use soil. So do you think there are any plants that are best propagated in soil versus, let's say, sphagnum moss or water?
Yeah, I agree that soil propagation is actually more commonly used in commercial plant production, whereas water propagation is popular for home production. And I think it's probably for the same reason that you and I love water propagation, just being able to see the roots.
Yes, yes. I feel like it's also a great method to use if you have, like, let's say you have a big backyard and you have loads of succulent leaves that you're wanting to propagate, that if you're wanting to lay them all out on soil so you can grow them. Like, let's say I know a few people who grow succulents that they sell as their business, and they're looking for ways to kind of mass produce their succulents. So one of the easiest ways for them to do it will be to lay succulent leaves on soil, let them kind of grow their roots, then plant them into the soil once they have their roots. And that can be a really popular method for that. On a smaller scale, though, of course, you can propagate succulent leaves in water as well.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is that, you can propagate most houseplants in water or in soil. And I always encourage people to do both, to try both methods, because, someone is not going to be successful with water, like propagating succulents in water, but if they stick a snake plant cutting into soil, they may just find that it grows.
Yes.
So I personally found that succulent leaf cuttings grow very well in water.
Yeah. And you have some great videos showing how to do that as well, right? Can you describe your one of your techniques or your main technique that you use for growing succulent leaves?
In water or soil?
In water.
In water.
Well, kind of water.
So I try to get larger leaves, so the larger the better. I usually pull off the leaves from the bottom of the plant. I try to take healthy leaves, not leaves that are yellowing or that have anything that looks wrong. I usually just wiggle them a little bit or twist them so that so we can take them off. I used to try to get the whole leaf off because I thought that was the only way to propagate them successfully. But I actually found some scientific papers recently that talked about succulents and meristematic cells in succulents. For those who don't know, meristematic cells are undifferentiated cells that can grow into leaves or roots or stems. So maybe
this is the difference between plants and humans. It's the reason that plants can grow new branches, whereas humans can't grow new limbs when ours are cut off. Meristem cells, because they're undifferentiated and can do stuff.
Right. Yeah, stem cell. That's a good comparison. So I actually read some research saying that meristematic cells in succulent leaves, in a lot of succulent leaves, are diffused, so that they are not concentrated in the proximal part of the leaf, the part of the leaf that's attached to the stem, but they're actually spread throughout the leaf. So in theory, you should be able to propagate leaves even if if you don't pull off the whole leaf. But that is also something that I am going to be testing soon.
Okay, excellent. And do you let your leaves callus before you propagate with them?
I don't. Honestly, I don't, because I found that most houseplants propagate very easily and that there really is no need to do it. Technically, the chances of the leaves or cuttings dying are higher if you don't let them callus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I made a succulent Christmas tree recently, and I had a bunch of questions to me by people going, why didn't you let did you let your cuttings callus beforehand? And I didn't let them callus beforehand. I mean, mainly it was because I needed to cut them exactly to the size, but then I chatted to a few horticulturalists and they were like, you don't need to let your cuttings callus necessarily. I think that might be another thing that has been kind of spread, a certain rumor that people have come to believe is true. But callusing is not essential for plants to propagate successfully, at least according to the horticulturalists that I've spoken to, according to my own experience, and then of course according to your extensive experience as well. So again, it goes to show plants are resilient. If you want to let your plants callus, you're welcome to. If you want to let them go as they are, you're welcome to. Plants are clever, they'll find a way, but there's not necessarily like a yes or a no for how you should do it, just a consideration that both options can work.
Yeah, and that's what we talked about. Like, there isn't only one right way to do things.
Yeah.
I would say if people are having trouble with propagating a specific plant, in that case, I would suggest first sterilizing the pruning tools, whether you use scissors or a knife, or whatever, and letting the leaves callus. Because I mean, if you're having troubles propagating, then you might as well give your cuttings the best chance, and callusing might help.
Yeah, very true.
But not necessarily. Yeah.
So what about propagating whole cacti? Not just like succulent leaves, but if you were going to take, like, I don't know, a pad off a cactus, or you were going to take a big cactus and cut off like one of its arms, what are your tips on how best to do that? Would you do that in soil or in water?
I would do that in soil. I've done it in water, and surprisingly, I've had those cacti live for a few months. But I would definitely do it in soil, and I would recommend letting those callus. Now, it depends. Like, if we're talking about a petal cactus, where you can easily pull off a petal and the wound isn't as big, it might be different. But with cacti, I usually always let them callus, especially if you're propagating something like Peruvian cactus. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Yeah, I have a big one at home. I love it.
Oh, wow. Nice. So, I mean, if you're going to propagate that, it's going to have a huge wound. So you absolutely have to let that one callus.
Okay, and that's because you want to expose the different kind of bacteria that are in the soil. Bacteria in soil are great, but obviously there's the chance that they might infect the wound. So if you can just let that close up a little bit before you plop it straight into there, it can help a bit. Exactly,
and then when you plop it, you just water it the same way you would water a regular cactus.
Okay, cool. So you just chop it, leave it for a few days to dry off, stick it into the soil, water it, and then wait. Easy.
Yeah. Well, with succulents also, I mean, with cacti, I don't necessarily water them as soon as I plop them. It depends on. I usually don't, because to be on the safe side, I like to leave them for a while and then water it at a later stage. I mean, with succulents, always better to be cautious and not overwater.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, they have so much water in their leaves as well that it helps a lot. Lastly, are there any general tips in terms of propagation that we haven't covered already? Now, while you're answering those, I'll just ask if anybody who is watching now and has questions of their own, start leaving your questions now and we'll answer them. In the meantime, I'm going to get Vlad to chat about some general tips that he has, and then we'll come back to the questions that you guys have before we wrap this up. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
Cool. So general tips, take it away.
General tips. My main tip is patience, and I already mentioned that because I get a lot of questions from people saying, hey, I have this snake plant cutting, it's been in water for a whole week and nothing has happened. So, I mean, I think we all need to
wait another 7 weeks.
Exactly. I mean, try waiting for 5 months to get some roots. So patience is one of my main tips. The other is to always take a healthy cutting.
Have you heard the little rhyme about patience?
No.
My mum taught me this. Patience is a virtue. Possess it if you can. Always in a woman and never in a man. I don't think it's true, by the way, because I'm just as impatient as the rest of them. But maybe if it's a guy that you're talking to next time, you can tell them that little proverb.
That's adorable. That's adorable. I think if whoever is into houseplants needs to be patient. I mean, most houseplants just don't grow that fast and they don't propagate that fast. Mm-hmm. It's important to take healthy leaves, healthy cuttings.
Yep, healthy is definitely very important.
People often take leaves that they find on the floor, mm-hmm. leaves that fell on their own. So if a leaf fell off on their own, most of the times there's something wrong with it, unless you physically knocked it off. In that case, you might be able to propagate it, but it's crucial to start with a healthy cutting. Mm-hmm. Also, I always suggest to take multiple cuttings, because people often just take one leaf or take one small cutting and then they get disappointed when it dies. The more cuttings you have, you're increasing the chances of success and lowering the chances for disappointment. I mean, I never propagate succulents with less than 5 or 10 leaves. Mm-hmm. What else? And I would say also an important thing to note is that not everything is under our control. We can try to provide the best conditions for a plant, but in the end, we can't control nature.
That's true. And if it doesn't work, it's not a reflection on the person. It doesn't mean that person is a bad plant parent. It doesn't mean that they are a failure. I don't actually believe in the term bad plant parent. I think it's a really terrible terminology to use, because it kind of implies that we are like Mother Nature, and we're not. We're simply a scientist attempting something that has a reasonably good chance of working, but it might not work. Just in the same way that when you're following a recipe at home, like, you've got a good chance of it working out right. But if it doesn't go well, it doesn't mean that you're a terrible person. It doesn't mean that you should never cook again. It doesn't mean that nobody should ever eat your food. And the same thing goes for propagation. If it doesn't work, it's absolutely not a reflection on your personality, on your ability to take care of plants or anything like that. It just means you've given something a go. That's great. Try again.
Exactly. Try again. If you can, if there is anything to learn from that experience, take the lesson. If there isn't, just try again.
Yes. So Plant Mitch here is an absolute legend, may I just say, because I'm assuming it's a he. I'm sorry. I'll just has some brilliant questions. The first question that has come through is, how do you feel about having several different plant cuttings in the same prop vessel? So, like, let's say different, I guess, species, or even different genera in the same vessel.
Oh, I feel great about it. I haven't noticed any problems with propagating different plants. I mean, the more the better, the more the merrier.
Agreed. There's absolutely no issue. I think sometimes people are concerned about doing that in water or even in soil. They think that they might be overcrowding it. The thing is, next time you go for a walk in your neighborhood, have a look at how plants are growing in the wild, and you'll notice that they're growing on top of each other, like literally on top of each other. The overcrowding isn't really a thing, because basically the way that roots work is you've got a plant that's sitting here. Let's say this is the soil. And then their roots will go out seeking water wherever they need to. So they spread out in a whole lot of different direction. And then the plant itself then grows up seeking light in the direction that it needs to. So there's like a dominance that happens with the plant's growth and dominance that happens with the plant's roots. You don't need to worry about overcrowding it, because they'll basically sort it out. And if you're doing it for propagation, your roots are only going to grow a maximum of this long, so they won't get tangled. So you're fine. Propagate all the things together. Is it okay to propagate a piece that has new growth? So, for example, let's say you take a cutting and it has a leaf that hasn't unfurled yet.
I've done it many times and they propagated successfully. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think if there's any reason why you shouldn't take a cutting with a leaf unfurling. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I've successfully propagated cuttings with new leaves. I actually have a cutting here of a monstera with a leaf that started unfurling recently.
I haven't observed any difference. I guess one of the things to know when you're propagating is you're not actually propagating the leaves. I know when you take a cutting, you're thinking about the leaves, but what you're actually doing with a cutting is this node here that's basically like genetic material that you're taking from the plant and telling to become a new plant. So this is the magic part. These leaves don't really matter that much. These leaves will eventually fall off and die. It's this part with the roots that grow and the new leaves that grow as the new plant that really matter the most. So don't overthink too much about the leaves. You want it to be a healthy piece of growth, of course, but the magic here is the roots and that part of the plant that you've cloned.
Right, it's not really, I mean, even if that new leaf gets stressed for some reason and doesn't survive, it's really not a big deal because all you want to do is have the roots growing and the cutting survive. Yeah.
So I can't see any other questions coming up. So I feel like this might be a natural end because we've been here for an hour and a half now, which is ages. So anyone who's wanting to catch up on the rest of this can watch it on my stories where the first half's already available, or you can access it on YouTube, which I will put up later. It takes a little while to upload onto YouTube because my phone is slow and I have to like leave it loading. But thank you so much for coming on. Anyone who has any other questions, feel free to just send questions either through to myself or to Vlad. We'll both happily answer the questions that you have. But yeah, otherwise it's been a pleasure. Any final words from you?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank you very much for organizing this. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and this is my first Instagram live, so thank you.
Everyone give him an applause. He's done very well. Yay! Yeah. Yay!
So thank you for pushing me to do this, and yeah, we'll do it again.
Absolutely nailed it. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us. I think we've had a really international crowd tonight. But to all my fellow Aussies, thank you for joining me on a very sexy Saturday night in talking about propagation. It's probably not something you'd usually do in a non-COVID era because usually we'd have better things to do.
Right.
But yeah, thank you. You did really well, and I'm really stoked to have you on, and I'll chat to you soon anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.